At the class reunion, Luis's ex-girlfriend, the one who had once abandoned him, came back. Truth or dare? He chose truth. Someone teased him, asking, "Luis, is the person you love here today?" He clenched his glass, his voice low. "Yes, but I didn't go to the reunion, so the one he loves isn't me." That night, I tore up the pregnancy report, speaking earnestly yet gently. "Luis, let's get a divorce." Chapter 01. Congratulations, Selena, you're pregnant. When I heard this news, my first reaction was to tell Luis. But after a moment's thought, I decided to surprise him tonight. I carefully put away the pregnancy report and sent him a message. "Luis, come home early tonight. I have something to tell you." I quickly got a response. "I have a dinner engagement tonight. You don't need to wait for me." I frowned slightly but ultimately said nothing. I only reminded him, "All right, be careful on your way. Don't drink too much. Watch out for your stomach." "Yes, ma'am." The words were playful, so different from the cold and serious president image Luis portrayed to the outside world. I couldn't help but smile, the knot in my heart loosening slightly. By evening, worried that Luis might get drunk, I got up to prepare some hangover soup. Just then, my phone suddenly lit up. It was a message from an unfamiliar number. "Selena, I'm back in the country, right now. I'm with your husband." The signature was Eva, and then there was a photo. Luis looked up slightly, his gaze falling on a woman in the corner, eyes full of tenderness. My heart trembled, and the knife lightly grazed my finger. Blood dripped onto the floor. So much for the dinner engagement. Turns out, Eva was back. Chapter 02. Luis and I were childhood friends in the true sense. Our families were well matched, but I wasn't his girlfriend. Eva was. In high school, Luis was a top student. From a good family, and stunningly handsome, he captured the hearts of countless girls. But he only liked Eva. Everyone knew it. Whether it was the public love confession on Eva's birthday or his constant favoritism toward her, I watched quietly, secretly envious. But during our freshman year in college, Luis's family suddenly faced a crisis. After his father's bankruptcy and suicide, his mother fell gravely ill. At that time, everyone around Luis disappeared, and Eva broke up with him and went abroad. He was depressed for a long time. When I found him, he was being beaten to the ground by debt collectors. I cried as I blocked those people, giving them all the money I had. The debt collectors saw my pitiful state, exchanged glances, and left. In the dim alley, only he and I remained. I carefully helped him up, but he shoved me away, his voice cold. "I don't need your pity." I, for once, stood my ground and blocked his way, speaking slowly. "Luis, I can help you. I swear." At that time I just wanted to help him, nothing else. Not seeking anything in return. But he looked at me for a long time that day, then suddenly let out a derisive laugh. "You want to keep me? Huh?" I froze. Before I could respond, he turned and left without a backward glance. But I still helped him. I paid his school fees, lent him money to invest in his business after graduation, helped him rise again, and personally took care of his hospitalized mother. His attitude toward me gradually softened, and later, he proposed to me. The ceremony was simple, but I was overjoyed. I thought I had finally melted Luis's icy heart, and that he had long forgotten Eva. But today, as I was overjoyed with the news of my pregnancy, he lied about a dinner engagement and turned around to attend his first love's return banquet. Quite laughable, really. Putting my phone away, I looked out the window and gently pushed it open. A gust of winter wind howled through, the breath I exhaled gathering and then dispersing, fleeting. Suddenly, I felt that this winter was colder than any before. Chapter 03. As I stepped on the snow and stood at the door of the bar's private room, I suddenly paused. I wasn't sure why I came, to catch him in the act, or to confront him. But either way, it was unseemly and undignified. Just then, a waiter pushed the door open, and upon seeing me, softly asked if I was lost. I shook my head. After he left, I gently pushed the door ajar, leaving a crack, not wide, but enough for me to clearly see inside the private room. In the dim lighting, Luis leaned back against the sofa, head slightly tilted up, his disheveled bangs falling across his forehead, making him look all the more mature and unrestrained. Attractive. Eva sat not far from him, staring at him intently, but Luis didn't even glance at her, as if she meant nothing to him. Eva's eyes quietly reddened, looking pitiful and aggrieved, so different from her boastful attitude when she messaged me. On July 30th, 4 years ago, Luis proposed to you, but you might not know that on that same day, I married someone else. Selena, do you think Luis married you because he truly loves you? To prove something to me, or simply not to owe you a favor, though phrased as a question? Her tone was certain. She was confident that Luis loved her, no matter what. Even now, as Luis seemed indifferent to her, some around noticed the scene, and someone, eager for drama, smiled and asked, Luis, want to play truth or dare? Luis neither nodded nor shook his head. The next moment, the bottle turned to him. He glanced at it, his tone indifferent. Truth. The person smiled, glanced at Eva, then looked back at Luis and asked, Luis, is the person you love here today? The private room instantly fell silent. After all, everyone knew about the history between Luis and Eva. Back then, Luis treated Eva so well, and yet, when he fell on hard times, Eva abandoned him without hesitation. If it hadn't been for my unwavering support and wholehearted help, Luis wouldn't have achieved his current success as a rising business tycoon. Who mattered more? Who truly cared for Luis? Anyone could see that, especially considering Luis's love for me over the years. It was well known, but Luis, he still didn't give an answer, neither a confirmation, nor a denial. Standing at the door, I stared at him intently, feeling my wildly beating heart grow colder, bit by bit. Chapter 04. In the private room, someone thought Luis found the question ridiculous, not worth answering. They laughed and said, What kind of question is that? It's too simple. Luis couldn't even be bothered to answer. Selena isn't here today, so obviously the person Luis loves isn't here. The others, hearing this, also began to talk about all the things Luis had done for me over the years. I love roses, so Luis built a rose garden just for me. On my birthday, he let me choose from a collection of expensive jewelry. At banquets, he repeatedly asserted his claim over me. When he received the Young Entrepreneur Award, he declared his love for me. There were so many moments, too many to count. Someone sneered at Eva, mocking her. Eva, you really couldn't see his worth back then. If you hadn't left, maybe today you'd be Mrs. Luis. Yeah, you abandoned Luis, and now you must regret it, right? Eva's face turned deathly pale, her fingers tightly gripping her glass until they were white, as if she were on the verge of collapse. But I noticed that Luis's jaw was tightly clenched, and he was rubbing his thumb in subtle irritation. This was his unconscious habit whenever he faced a difficult decision. He was seriously considering it. A moment later, just as Eva was about to flee under the scornful laughter of the crowd, Luis suddenly took a large gulp of his drink and said, Yes. Everyone was stunned. Someone reminded him, Luis, you must be drunk. Your wife isn't here today. But Luis put down his glass and repeated, The person I love is here. The final word. I wasn't there, but Eva was. So who Luis loved was obvious. The room fell silent. Eva, however, was ecstatic. Luis, I knew you still loved me. Coming back for you was the right decision. Luis glanced at her hand holding onto his sleeve, a glimmer crossing his eyes, but he did not pull away. The next second, he nonchalantly shifted his gaze, tilted his head slightly. Then, he saw me standing at the doorway. Luis's expression instantly froze. Behind him, Eva's eyes held a hint of smugness, as if to say, See, even after all this time, Luis's obsession with cleanliness still doesn't apply to me. She, Eva, was always the exception for Luis. Selena, don't mind it. Luis saying he loves me just now was probably because he drank too much. A pathetic act, but disgusting enough. I frowned slightly and looked at Eva. Eva, in a show of defiance, tried to hold Luis's hand, but the next second, Luis shook off her hand, taking a step toward me. Selena, It's so cold today. Why aren't you resting at home? Haven't you always found bars noisy? His voice was gentle, his words considerate, as if nothing had just happened. I looked up at him, a faint smile on my lips, but I avoided his outstretched hand. It is quite cold today. It really was quite cold, and so was my heart. Chapter 05. Back home. The hangover soup on the table was still steaming. The wisps of steam rose into the air, then dispersed, as if they had never existed. I raised my hand, lifted the pot lid, and quietly poured a bowl of soup, placing it in front of Luis. When I tried to pull my hand back, he caught it. He spoke. "Selena, about just now." He wanted to explain what had happened earlier. He knew I had heard. But after a moment, I still didn't hear the explanation I was waiting for. His expression grew stiffer, and I smiled as I helped complete his explanation. "You had a few drinks, and sometimes that leads to saying the wrong things." "I understand." He looked at my expression, seeing that I genuinely didn't seem to care. He frowned slightly but nodded nonetheless. He quietly drank the soup. Under the dim yellow light, the sharpness of his features softened. He was no longer the spirited young master from high school, nor the reserved, understated young man from college. Now, after all the hardships he'd endured, he had undergone a complete transformation, shining brightly. And through this journey, I was always there. When Luis's family's company was just starting out, they couldn't even afford to pay wages. It was me who took out years of savings, who gave up my favorite painting, working in his company as a junior accountant, a clerk, his most reliable secretary and assistant. Step by step, I was by his side, as we built the company from a small workshop of fewer than 10 people into a large corporation of hundreds and thousands. 10 years have passed now. I've always been curious. I looked at him and suddenly asked, "Luis, why did you marry me back then?" Clink. The spoon hit the edge of the bowl. Luis looked up at me, his smile gentle. "Because you're well-behaved, beautiful, and exceptional. Very specific, very complete." I nodded in agreement, then spoke again in a soft voice. "Then, why did you like Eva back then?" This was the first time I mentioned Eva. Seriously. Luis noticed my attitude and let out a helpless laugh, as if he didn't know how to deal with me. But he got stuck. He frowned slightly, his eyes revealing a hint of contemplation. But no answer came. I kept looking at him until my eyes started to ache, and I quickly blinked them away, smiling as I changed the topic. "Luis, do you love me now?" Without hesitation, he replied, "Of course I love you." I silently looked at him. Luis raised his hand and pulled me into his embrace, holding me tightly, as if he wanted to merge me into his body, never to part. "Selena, I love you. I won't say things like that again. I'm sorry. I just didn't want to embarrass Eva because of me. That's why I said those things. I know it hurts you, and it's my fault." His tone was sincere, his words gentle. My fingers trembled slightly, and I nodded. But he didn't know that the heart in my chest, which had fluttered countless times for him, seemed tired, beating slowly, so lightly, just like how he didn't know that truly loving someone means you can't explain the reason. Just as he couldn't explain what he liked about Eva, because he liked everything about her. So how could he possibly put it into words? If it can be put into words, then is it even love? But I didn't want to tell him. Too tired. Chapter 06. The next morning, I told Luis that I was going to my mom's place today. He said he wanted to come with me, but when the appointed time came, Luis still hadn't shown up. I drove back alone. My mom was surprised to see me by myself. "Why didn't Luis come?" I'm not good at lying, so I said nothing. My mom changed the subject accordingly. My parents had a marriage of convenience, but their love remained as strong as ever over the years. My mom was spoiled by my dad, her smile and frown full of happiness. In contrast, I seemed a bit worn out. I suddenly remembered how many years ago, my mom had tried to stop me from being with Luis, though soon after, she gave in to my wishes. Back then, I thought it was because of our family backgrounds not matching, but now I felt my mom wasn't that shallow. So I asked, "Mom, why didn't you want me to be with Luis back then?" My mom looked at me for a long time, as if she had figured something out. Her voice gentle, because you two are too alike. Equally stubborn, equally determined to keep going until you hit a wall. Is that so? I thought about it. No answer. When I was about to leave, my mom gently stroked my face. Her eyes tinged with sadness. Selena, no matter what decision you make, follow your heart. Don't do anything that you'll regret. But what would make me regret it? Again. No answer. When I got home, Luis still hadn't returned. I opened my phone, and it was filled with his messages of apology and explanation. I didn't reply to any of them. Then I drove to his office building. The receptionist recognized me and tried to stop me by making a call. She looked at me as if she wanted to say something, and just as I was about to get on the elevator, she suddenly said, "Madam, you should pay more attention to the boss." I froze. Before I could understand the hidden meaning behind her words, the elevator doors had already closed. But soon enough, I understood. I raised my hand, just about to push open the door to Luis's office, when I heard a familiar sob. Luis, I really don't know what to do. I was forced to leave back then, and all these years, I've never forgotten you. I know you still love me, right? My movement came to an abrupt stop. Chapter 07. It was Eva. She stood in front of Luis, dressed in a pink dress, her black hair against her pale skin, eyes red, crying pitifully and helplessly. But Luis wouldn't look at her. I'm already married. What you do has nothing to do with me. Cold, harsh, heartless. Eva seemed wounded by his icy demeanor, her face ashen as she let out a bitter laugh. I understand. I just love you. I won't try to ruin what you have with Selena. She's a lady of wealth. Unlike me, I have nothing now. How could I ever match you? But besides you, where else can I go? If I go home, I'll definitely be forced to marry that old man. I'd rather just die. She clutched her chest, crying so miserably it seemed she might faint at any moment. Luis merely glanced at her before lowering his head to deal with the documents, saying nothing, if not for seeing his slightly trembling fingertips, or the creases left on the document he clenched tightly. I might have believed that he was truly unmoved, but I knew him too well. So, I knew that at this very moment, he was making a choice between marriage and Eva. But the answer was obvious. He stepped towards Eva and, under her expectant gaze, pulled her into his arms. His voice was low. Eva, don't be afraid. As long as I'm here, no one can force you. Eva's eyes shimmered with tears, crying with joy. The dark gray-toned office seemed to take on a hint of warmth from their embrace. I stood outside the door, watching the two of them hugging, kissing, and expressing their longing for each other. I didn't interrupt. I made no sound, until they walked out of the office hand in hand. Then they saw me. Luis's expression changed instantly. He opened his mouth, but only managed to say a few words. Selena, how long have you been here? I looked at him and let out a soft laugh. A long time. Long enough that as I looked at this man I had loved for so many years, I suddenly felt as though I was looking at a stranger. Long enough that the heart which had fluttered for him countless times could no longer find any love. Not a single trace of it. Selena, let's go home. I cut off his explanation, smiling as I repeated, Luis, let's go home. I think I have to make my decision. Chapter 08. Back at home, neither of us spoke. The room was silent. I turned on the light, the warm yellow glow filling the room, falling on Luis, as if casting a layer of light over him. He hung his head, hands clasped together, silent. Suddenly, I remembered 4 years ago, the day he proposed to me. He was sitting across from me like this, looking at me intently. He called softly, Selena. I froze. He gave a soft laugh, his eyes curving, then seriously asked me, would you marry me? At that moment, my mind went blank. It wasn't until he laughed out loud that I came back to my senses, and without hesitation, I nodded. I had always considered that day the happiest day of my life, but Eva shattered my beautiful dream. Right now, I looked at the man in front of me and asked softly, Luis, do you remember what you said when you proposed to me? He raised his eyes to look at me, his hands clenching instinctively. You said, when two people are together, they should never betray, never part. I paused, my voice raspy as I spoke again. But you cheated. I saw it with my own eyes. He anxiously explained. Selena, I was just confused at the moment. I really don't have feelings for Eva anymore. I cut him off. But you're not willing to let go. You're not willing to let go of your unfulfilled love for Eva from your youth. Not willing to let go of that wasted youth. So, you've never forgotten her, even though it was me by your side all these years. Even though it was me who helped you rise again. Even though Luis kept professing his love to me, doing one grand gesture after another. In the past, I felt overjoyed by this. But thinking about it now, Luis had always been low-key about everything, except when it came to declaring his love for me. Why? Did he really love me? Or was he using me to spite Eva, who was far away? I think it was the latter. Luis never loved me. Instead, he kept using me, again and again, from beginning to end. I loved the wrong person. Thinking of this felt like my heart was being scorched by fire, slashed by a knife, bloody, painful beyond words. Luis stayed silent for a long time, long enough that I thought he wouldn't speak again. Suddenly, he said, Selena, I swear, I won't look for her again. Can you give me another chance? I already gave you one. I wiped away the tears in the corner of my eyes, my voice very soft. That day, when you said you loved Eva. Chapter 09. Luis's expression froze. Maybe he thought I seemed so calm that day because I didn't care anymore. But that wasn't true. That day, I was deeply hurt. He said he only did it to save Eva from embarrassment. But I knew him too well, so I knew he was lying. On that same day, he lied to me twice. All for Eva. Quite laughable. Really, to be honest. Before that day, I thought my love for Luis was rock solid, unbreakable. But after that day, I realized I was wrong. My love was fragile. So fragile that a single glance, a single sentence could easily shatter it. But I wasn't willing to let go. I had accompanied Luis step by step to where he was today, enduring hardships, shedding tears and sweat. Why should I just hand him over to someone else? So, self-righteously, I gave Luis another chance. I told myself, if they had no more contact, I could pretend that today never happened. But I was wrong. Just as I couldn't let go of what Luis said that day, Luis also couldn't let go of Eva. I always said Luis was unwilling to give up on Eva. How was I any different? That's why I held on to a false marriage, a deceitful husband, unwilling to let go even in death. But thinking about it now, what's the point? All I got was endless self-consumption and self-harm. At this moment, I suddenly gave up. I loved the wrong person, and I admitted it. Looking at the man in front of me, I took off the diamond ring from my finger, speaking earnestly and gently. Luis, honestly, if you fell for someone else, whether it's Eva or anyone else, I could understand. But you should have been honest with me, not lied to me over and over. I am your wife, the one who accompanied you for years. Even if you don't love me, you should respect me. Or maybe, seeing me dance in circles because of you made you feel significant. Luis looked at me anxiously, reaching out to take my hand. Selena, no, I never meant to deceive you. I pulled away. He never meant to deceive me. But he did, again and again. I can barely tell what's true and what's false anymore. I'm tired. I don't want to bother figuring it out any longer. I looked into his eyes and said, word by word, Luis, let's get a divorce. I'm tired, so I won't want you anymore. As for the child, I carefully touched my still flat abdomen and let out a soft sigh. Chapter 10. Luis agreed to the divorce. Because that night, my attitude was so resolute. Luis, if you don't agree, I'll sue you. His company was about to go public. At such a critical point, he couldn't afford to let something like this happen. No matter how much he didn't want it. He moved out of the house, and I blocked all his contact information, as if this way, he would vanish from my life. But every night, in the early hours, I could still see his car and the faint spark from a cigarette when I looked out the window. Luis smoked in his car. I thought he had quit long ago. Turns out, he hadn't. He had only hidden it. Just like his love and unwillingness for Eva and me. I contacted my doctor. Scheduled the surgery for tomorrow. This child, whom I did not expect and love, I no longer wanted. Chapter 11. Click. The surgical light turned on. After being injected with anesthesia, I was supposed to drift off to sleep, but I could still hear some voices. It's a little girl. Yes. It's really a pity. She's fully formed. I heard Selena had a miscarriage before, and now she's getting rid of this one too. It might be hard for her to conceive again in the future. Yes, a miscarriage. I remember it was when the company was just starting. The most difficult time, unable to secure investments. I didn't want my parents to look down on him, so I didn't seek their help. Back then, it was just Luis and me running the company, seeking investors, finding projects, busy day and night. Neither of us noticed that a small life had silently come into this world, until I fell from the stairs due to low blood sugar. The child was gone. My heart nearly shattered too. Luis held me tightly, crying out loud for the first time, apologizing to me, promising to treat me well. I believed him. That day, two people who had lost the most precious thing held each other tightly, trying to find warmth in one another. At that moment, I truly believed we would last forever, until Eva came back. Until now, here I am, lying on the operating table, about to end the life of our second child. Liar. Luis, you hurt me so deeply. You never really loved me, but thankfully, now, I no longer love you either. Luis. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was the nurse's gentle smile. Selena, how are you feeling? I'm fine. I nodded, my gaze turning to the window, and I suddenly noticed that the tree outside had silently sprouted some buds. Tender, fragile, yet growing resiliently in the cold wind. So, spring is coming. How wonderful. This winter, colder than any before, is finally coming to an end. It won't be cold anymore. Chapter 12. I didn't tell anyone about the miscarriage. Not even my parents knew about it. I loved the wrong person. I'll bear the consequences myself. Why add more sadness to others? The lawyer I hired was well known in the field, and in less than a month, the divorce papers were delivered to me. All the assets were split 70-30. 70 for me, 30 for Luis. The lawyer told me. Originally, it was 60-40. Mr. Luis voluntarily increased your share, perhaps out of guilt, but I wouldn't refuse. After signing my name, I looked directly at the man sitting across from me for the first time. It had only been half a month since I'd last seen him, but Luis looked alarmingly haggard. Even his suit was disheveled. Nothing like his usual self. Luis. I called his name. He looked up at me, his eyes sunken, dark circles heavy. He looked somewhat pitiful, as if he was the one betrayed, not me. Do you know what the good news I wanted to tell you that day was? I looked back at him, smiling slightly. That day, I found out I was pregnant. I thought you had the right to know that there once existed a child that was ours. I placed an ultrasound image and the prenatal checkup report in front of him. You could vaguely see the curled-up shadow inside. That was the child I had longed for. Now, it no longer exists. I killed it with my own hands. In that moment, I belatedly felt an uncontrollable pain spreading through my chest. Unspeakable. Impossible to let go of. Luis. It was you who gave up on him. Luis's breath hitched as he stared blankly at the 2 sheets of paper in front of him. They looked light, but felt so heavy. He read them over and over again, his eyes more shattered than I had ever seen before. When he spoke again, his voice was hoarse. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He was questioning me. How laughable. Because, I thought for a moment, and the smile slowly faded from my face. Because you don't deserve it, Luis. I stayed by your side for so long, and you could hurt me over and over again for someone who abandoned you. Who hurt you? A child you didn't even know. Do you really care? So stop pretending you were ever deeply in love. You don't deserve love. Never deserving. I took the agreement, turned around, and walked away, faintly hearing the sound of yelling behind me. Maybe it was Luis. Maybe it wasn't. But I no longer cared. Chapter 13. News of my divorce from Luis quickly spread. The division of property attracted a lot of attention. 70 for me, 30 for him. Everyone said Luis was generous. And to my surprise, Eva actually reached out to me. In the cafe, she glared at me, her expression hostile. And the first thing she said was an accusation. Selena, don't you think you're being too greedy? I raised an eyebrow at her. Luis's company is about to go public. Now that you've divorced him and taken so much of his assets, how is he supposed to go public? Aren't you ruining him? I took a sip of my coffee, my tone indifferent. Yes, I am ruining him. I knew this was a critical time for him. I also knew that the assets he gave me were enough to ruin all of his plans. But so what? I let out a soft laugh. For someone who betrayed and hurt me, should he really have a happy ending? This was what I deserved. I admitted that I loved the wrong person, and I would bear the consequences. Luis cheated during our marriage, and he had to bear the consequences too. That's only fair. Eva looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, her eyes widening. Selena, you're really cruel. Anyone else in this world can judge me, but you have no right. I looked at the woman in front of me, who considered herself Mrs. Luis. And the smile on my face slowly faded, replaced by coldness. You're just someone who tried to interfere in someone else's marriage. Eva, hearing this, showed no shame. Instead, she smiled triumphantly. Selena, you were married to Luis for so many years, and you couldn't hold on to his heart. Isn't that because you're useless? How could you blame me? Before she could finish, I raised my hand and slapped her across the face. Slap. The sound was crisp. Eva was stunned by the slap. Selena, you. I grabbed her chin, coldly staring into her eyes. Eva, I don't blame you, but you won't be with Luis either. I, Selena, have never been one to be bullied. I have never been easy to deal with. Otherwise, I wouldn't have fought alongside Luis. Step by step, through the blood-soaked business world, I reined in my temper, willing to be Luis's support. Not because I was soft-hearted or easy to bully, but because I loved Luis. Eva thought that using Luis to hurt me would leave me devastated, causing me to leave in despair, letting her easily take my place. But unfortunately for her, she had always underestimated me. I, Selena, have never been the kind of fragile woman who could be shattered by love. The harm Eva inflicted on me, I could only return to her 100-fold, 1,000-fold. This was the ending I chose for her. Chapter 14. After Eva returned to the country, she entered the entertainment industry. With Luis's investment and resources, she quickly gained some fame. But during an arranged live broadcast, a woman suddenly broke into the studio. She started tearing into Eva in front of everyone. You filthy woman. I finally found you, seducing my husband abroad, making him divorce me, and taking all our assets back to the country. Did you really think you were clean? That no one knew about your dirty deeds? And now you're using the same tricks, seducing a corporate CEO to get him to divorce. Eva, aren't you disgusting? Just a few sentences, but the amount of information was immense. Everyone was shocked. Eva struggled frantically, yelling with all her might, "Turn off the live broadcast." It was only then that the staff reacted, pulling the plug. But it was too late. Everyone had seen it clearly, heard it clearly. In this era where the internet spans the world, everything Eva had done abroad was quickly dug up. Even a well-known blogger personally revealed more evidence. In the photos, Eva lay on a bed, scantily clothed, looking sexy and sultry. Beside her stood an overweight older man. He was staring at her with a look of obsession. That man was the husband of the woman who had broken into the studio. He was also Eva's ex-husband. This news caused an online uproar. Eva was finished. Her reputation was ruined. She also faced a lawsuit from the woman, who wanted her rightful share of the property back. At this point, everyone was closely watching Luis's response. It didn't take long for the company to issue a statement denying any relationship with Eva. Eva even went to Luis's corporate headquarters and was caught on camera. Eva threw herself at Luis, crying, but was ruthlessly thrown to the ground by security guards. Pitiful and pathetic, Luis didn't even glance at her, walking straight ahead, facing questions from reporters. His handsome face was cold and stern. I have nothing to do with this. My relationship with Miss Eva ended as classmates. There is nothing more. Calm and dignified. He seemed like a person from a completely different world compared to Eva. Covered in dirt on the ground, Eva cried her heart out in agony. I watched the video with indifferent eyes, my thoughts swirling until they turned into a sigh. Luis has always been a businessman, cold-blooded, unfeeling. In the face of disadvantage, he would only discard decisively. The so-called unwillingness and love he had for Eva were nothing compared to immense profit. Eva misjudged him, ending up like this. She only had herself to blame. Chapter 15. Luis's company ultimately did not go public. The funding chain was insufficient. I had already guessed it, but I had no time to focus on that anymore. I officially took over my father's position and became the owner of my family company. From being Mrs. Luis, I became a company CEO. The next time I saw Luis was at a friend's baby's 100-day celebration. The friend's child was chubby and extremely cute. I took the baby in my arms, soft and with a sweet milk scent. For some reason, I thought of my 2 children who never came to be. If they had been born, they would be around this size now. One day they would have called me Mom so sweetly. Thinking of this, my heart twisted as if by a knife, the pain almost unbearable. At that moment, my friend patted me. Luis is here. I looked up and saw Luis standing not far away, staring blankly in my direction. My friend sighed and said, "He's been doing quite badly. I heard Eva won't leave him alone. Even secretly took pictures and videos of her kissing Luis, forcing him to take responsibility for her, threatening to release them to prove he cheated during marriage. Recently, Luis's attempt to go public failed, and now he urgently needs investment to maintain the funding chain. The last thing he needs is a scandal, and apparently, they still haven't come to an agreement. But it's his own fault. You helped him for so long, yet he wasn't grateful." The last words were full of schadenfreude and sarcasm. I smiled faintly, turned, and left the hall. Walking into the garden, Luis followed me. "Selena, long time no see." I turned my head to look at him. "Hello, Luis." The tone was distant. Luis let out a bitter laugh and suddenly said, "Selena, today is my birthday. Could you walk with me for a while?" I was taken aback, frowning slightly. I wanted to refuse, but seeing the persistence in his eyes, I eventually nodded. Chapter 16. We left the banquet hall. Luis led me to the entrance of a small alley. The alley was dark, the wind blowing through it carrying a dampness. I stopped. Luis walked a few more steps forward and said softly, "Do you remember this place?" I pressed my lips together, not answering. I was beaten down by the debt collectors here. At that time, I even wanted to kill them, but I couldn't. So I just endured the beating. And then you appeared. You threw yourself on me, crying. Back then, I thought you were just pitying me. But much, much later, I understood that you were hurting for me. He let out a bitter laugh, his tone tinged with a sense of regret. You were good to me, helped me, not because you pitied me, but because you liked me. I knew you liked me, and my first reaction was actually relief, because if you liked me, you'd never leave me. In this life, I've lost too much. I didn't want to lose you." I silently looked at him, without a word. At some point, a small streetlight at the alley's entrance turned on. The dim light fell on Luis's face, casting shadows on his sharp features. Yet his eyes were filled with gloom. He looked back at me. "You once asked me why I proposed to you. In the past, I thought it was just to spite Eva. But after the divorce, I finally understood. I married you because I wanted to see you happy. A long time ago, I regretted it. I should have loved you well. I shouldn't have let my resentment from my younger years cloud my mind." Yes, what Luis felt for Eva might not have been love, just a sense of defiance. But whatever it was, it ruined us. He said he regretted it. So what if he regretted it? Would the hurt disappear? Would the tears from countless nights vanish? He asked me, "Selena, can you forgive me?" I looked at his hand, clenched until the veins showed, his hair scattered across his forehead, his eyes carrying a hint of pleading, as if I were his last lifeline. My answer, it seemed, decided his fate. But I can't. I looked at him, speaking each word clearly. If I forgive everything, then it means I deserved everything that happened. He instantly deflated, his straight back slightly slumping, as if all his strength had been drained. I turned to look at the alley's entrance. It was bright, the ground paved neatly with red bricks, clean and tidy, no longer the dark, cluttered alley it used to be, just as I could no longer find the sharp, brooding trace of Luis who used to lean against the wall, looking up at me, and I no longer cried for him. Unknowingly, we both changed. This marriage, this love, now, there's nothing left but a mess. A gust of wind blew, making my voice scatter in pieces. I spoke softly, but I don't want to pursue it anymore, no matter what happened in the past. Let's just let it go. I want to live well now. I don't want to be trapped by the past anymore. Chapter 17. I turned and left the alley. Looking up, I saw the trees along the road already had green leaves, and the streetlights were lighting up one by one, shining through the leaves, spreading over the ground. I walked quietly, step by step. Then a shadow fell in front of me. I looked up. It was Luis from my youth. His eyes shimmered with specks of light, wearing a white shirt, his collarbones jutting out like butterfly wings ready to spread. He smiled with his eyes curved, his voice very soft. Selena, will you marry me? I looked at him for a long time. Then, I shook my head. I heard myself say, I don't want to anymore. The days I spent married to you, I was once happy, once sad. I don't regret knowing you, but if I were given another chance, I wouldn't want to marry you again. Being with you, it was quite painful. I know that being with someone is a huge gamble in itself, and I also know that in this gamble, I lost. So, I don't want to gamble anymore. At that moment, a gust of wind blew, and the Luis in front of me vanished. A drop of rain hit the corner of my eye, like a tear, but I stopped crying for Luis long ago. I never will again. Just like how that surging love from all those years has already faded away with the passage of time, disappeared completely. After a spring rain, the chill brought by winter dissipated. I think that the day when spring blossoms arrive will surely come, won't it?